Welcome to the Atheon Analytics training video on Omniscope DataManager. For those of you familiar with Omniscope already, DataManager is a new workspace which was added in version 2.6. DataManager is a new drag and drop visual workspace which enables non-technical users to import, assemble, transform, filter, sample, scramble and export tabular datasets with no knowledge of SQL. It's essentially a way of managing all the data that you put into your Omniscope file. We would recommend that any users of Omniscope use the DataManager front screen to import all data files from now on. So when you open up Omniscope on the front screen, you see two icons, one for DataManager and one for Data Explorer. In this case, we're going to go into the DataManager icon. And here we are in a new file with a blank DataManager screen. So from here we're going to start importing some data. The main bits of the screen that you need to be aware of at this stage is up in the top left, the blocks, up in the top right, the blue bar, which will be familiar to all Omniscope users, and down at the bottom of the screen, the preview. You can see at the moment this is a blank file. So starting with the blocks over on the left hand side at the top, there are a few things that you'll really need to know to get you started in Omniscope. Firstly are the sources. So if we open up sources, this is essentially any source of data that you want to import into Omniscope. So just as before, you can import from databases, Excel files, etc. And to begin with, we're going to start with a really simple example. So I'm going to click on my source being a file, and I'm going to select my file called 2010 sales. So this is a very simple example with just one source of data. Now if I hover over the file, we can do a few things here. Using the arrow in the top left of the file, I can open it out, we can have a look at the information, we can preview the file using the preview icon. This will show us some of the information that's held in that file. And we can load the file. Clicking on the load icon, this will load the data straight into Omniscope. So this is a very simple example where we have one source of data, an Excel file, and we've loaded it straight into Omniscope. And I can see now at the bottom of the page a preview of what the data looks like. Up in the top left of the page you can see the Data Manager tab. The next tab is the Data Explorer tab, and if we click on that it takes us through to the familiar front page of Omniscope. So back into Data Manager, focusing for a moment just on the sources of data. We've selected a file so far, but you can see the other sources listed. So you could, for example, select a URL or a database table. You can pick them from the list within sources. One thing that's worth knowing here is the batch append function. This is very useful when you have a folder full of files that you'd like to append together all in one go. In this example, our sales data, my 2011 sales, we can see that it's come in here all in separate weeks. So we have about 20 separate files here, all with 1 week's worth of data in each file. So what I'm going to do in this case is choose my batch append files, and within the batch append block I'm going to point it at an entire folder of files. So now what I want to do is append together my folder of 2011 sales and my single file of 2010 sales on the left. So to do this, I'm now going to go to Operations on the left hand side of the screen, and within Operations there are a number of functions that will be familiar to anyone who's used Omniscope before. In this case we're going to use the append function right at the top of the operations block. So now with our append block on the screen, I'm simply going to drag and drop using the arrows from each of the sources of data and append them together. Having done that, we could simply now load this data straight into Omniscope, and now we can see the data at the bottom of the screen. And up in the top right, our blue bar, which will be familiar to anyone who's used Omniscope, is showing us that we've got 40,000 records of data. So that's a very, very quick way of taking our entire folder of data and appending them together. Some of the other key operations that you might want to use are field organizers. So I can just click and drag a field organizer here into the screen, and this is now adding a new process for the data to go through before it goes into Omniscope. So if I open up the field organizer, we can do a number of different things here, such as rename the data, rename the fields, we can change the data types, we can change from text to integer numbers and so on, and if we want to, we can add new fields and formulae. In this case, I'm going to add a new field and calculate selling price. So having put my formula in, I can set the decimal places, put a prefix, etc. And now when I reload the data, you can see that the formula has appeared at the bottom of the screen. Some of the other key operations that we might want to use are deduplicating data. We can see a dedupe blocks here. We can take a record filter if we want to take a certain amount of data or exclude certain bits of data. We can delete empty data, etc. And some of the more familiar operations that Omniscope users will have used in the past. Once you've loaded the data, you can then go into your Data Explorer screen and you can start creating new tabs as you would have done previously. You can, of course, however, go back at any point into the DataManager screen and perform any operations that you wish to enrich the data. So in this example, I've picked 3 new sources of data. I've picked 2 files which need to be depivoted, and then also a file which I'd like to merge in to give more attributes to the products. If we preview one of the data sources very quickly, we can see that the data sources, in this case it's time across, and we know from using Omniscope previously that we'd like to make this time down, so we need to perform a depivot. So back in operations on the left hand side of the screen, this time we're going to choose a depivot and then connect our data block. The dpivot works just as it did previously in Omniscope, so I need to give the pivot series field name a new name, in this case date, and the values a new field name called sales, and then choose the fields that we want to depivot. So we can see that's now executed, and if we preview the data we can see that we have time down. I'm going to quickly perform this operation on the second set of data as well, and having depivoted these 2 sets of data, I now want to merge them together. So again, over in operations, I'm going to select the merge join function and then simply click and drag the 2 data blocks into our merge function. Now once the data sets are connected in the merge join, we have to tell it how to do the merge, just as we did before in Omniscope. In this case, we're going to match where the field name's product description matches and where the field name date matches, and then execute that merge. Out of this merge data, I now want to merge in my lookup table from over on the right hand side. So again, I'm performing another merge here, this time just merging where the product descriptions match. And finally, I'm going to load the data into Omniscope. So we can see now the data at the bottom of the screen, and the data is now ready for me to use and to create my visualizations. Here we're now back in the Data Explorer tab and adding visualizations to the screen. And just as before, I can go back into DataManager, and this screen always gives me full traceability of the operations that I performed on the data. So if I need to make any amendments, I can do it from this screen without having to try and work out what I've done before loading the data into Omniscope. Also, importantly, if I want to change my data source, let's say I want to create a new file from a different set of data, I can simply replace the files at the top of the screen and the data will automatically be passed through the various operations that we've set on this screen. This is still a relatively simple example of how we might perform an ETL process, but as you can see from this screen, we can create much more complex processes. For more information on DataManager, either go to the visokio.com DataManager page, or for a free copy of a quick start guide, please email us at support@atheon.co.uk.